Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for our Dion Leadership webinar series. Today, our topic is going to be a leadership pipeline success story, and I have with me this day Steve Dion, our founder and CEO, as well as Chuck Joswick, the Director of Global Talent at DexKo Global.
Thank you, Lauren, and thanks, Chuck, for joining us on our Dion Leadership webinar series today. I'm excited to have you here.
Thanks for the opportunity, Steve.
And thanks everybody for being able to attend. I know everybody's busy, and we want to provide you with a lot of value in this program and series. I'm excited to share the mic with Chuck and with DexKo to share this success story. So what I'd like to do today, to kind of level set, if you haven't been on one of our webinars before, we try to provide a variety of different topics to engage leadership and OD and line leaders in the space that we think is interesting topics. And in this case, we're sharing a success story and really in a case study format. So I offer you the option to please use the chat. If you have any questions throughout this, we'd be happy to share specific information about how this program unfolded. What we're going to share with you today is a bit more about the program that DexKo Global created, and I'm super excited to be able to platform this as a partnership that I think is a great success story of how two organizations like Dion Leadership and DexKo Global work together to create a sustainable leadership development program. And before I turn it over to Chuck, who's going to lead the lion's share of this topic, I want to kind of share kind of what we're going to cover today and a little bit about kind of how Dion's played into this. And then we're going to talk a little bit about who DexKo Global is, what the challenges were, and then kind of walk you through kind of a 4-year journey of what this program looked like. But today we're going to hopefully accomplish the things on the screen here today to share with you and leave time at the end again for some questions. So before I turn over to Chuck, for those of you that haven't met Dion Leadership, what we are all about is working with organizations to create situations where employees start every day excited and end every day accomplished. And we really kind of think about the behaviors of that, like an employee being able to drive into an office or go downstairs and get ready to work and go, I can't wait to get going with what I do and how I do it and the people I get to do it with. And it's going to, start my day. And then at the end of the day, they come home and feel fulfilled and go, wow, I actually feel good about my contributions, and I can go home and be a great parent and, spouse, whatever I do at night, I'm fulfilled and not drained. And so the work that what we did, I think with DexKo Global falls within that. And the space that we play in is here. Today, we're going to primarily be talking about the blend of leadership development, leadership coaching, management training, and team assessments. I think we cover kind of 4 main areas here in this particular space. And then as you can see here, this is a list of the Dion Leadership clients, but DexKo is one of our strongest partnerships. Again, I'm super excited to share this story because for those of you that are struggling with trying to create a program and garner support at the senior leadership level, Chuck and his team have absolutely done that, and you'll hear that through our story today. So enough about Dion Leadership. The story today is really about DexKo Global and what they did. So let me turn over to Chuck to talk a little bit about the organization and what they've been doing. Take it away, Chuck.
Hey, Steve. All right. Hey, everybody. So first, I want to talk a little bit about, as we dive into this, what is DexKo Global? Then a little bit about how we became who we are today and why the need for some of this leadership development training and the concepts around it and kind of what became our true north. So overall, from a market standpoint, you see on the screen here, it's really diverse. That's a business strategy that we have. No knock on automotive whatsoever. I came from a 30-plus year automotive family, General Motors, with my dad, my sister, et cetera, and love it. But it's a strategic decision to actually have avoided that just based on the volatility sometimes of that industry. But it's hard to nail down who our competitor is otherwise. Anything we sometimes say at DexKo, we carry what matters most. So if you look under any of the things in the pictures you see here, whether it's a trailer, whether it's an RV, whether it's a bike or a horse trailer or a tractor of any kind, chances are it's got something from DexKo on it. What made up DexKo, and Steve, if you want to flip the slide or more, thank you, is aggressive acquisition. So these are the largest acquisitions that we've had since about 2016 when it was formed. So DexKo is Dexter Axle and Elco Global. So you put those two together and you get DexKo Global. The merger of those happened in 2016. The marketing teams got really fancy and trying to figure out what to call us. And so Dexter, which is in Indiana, and Elco, which is largely based in Germany, is what made up DexKo Global overall. And you'll see here the aggressive track record. What you don't see is, just to give you a flavor of, and then we'll talk a little bit about why leadership development and where we started with it and the purpose of where we started with it, is this shows our largest from 2016, but it doesn't show those all of them. And so since 2016 to today, we've had over 30 acquisitions, new company acquisitions. In 2016, there was just north, on a good day, 1,000 employees. Now we have 7,300 employees. And we've gone from just over $1 billion in revenue to well over $3 billion now. And seeing record profitability, very proud to be a part of that, an organization that's shown that growth. But you can see hyper growth. And as we know as HR professionals, it doesn't matter if you have one location or if you have 700 locations. We have just shy of 500 now. It doesn't matter though how many of those you have, as long as you have employees that are doing something good in the organization, you want to help them grow. Complexity kicks in then culturally, obviously, when we have that many different locations. And that's been part of the fun challenge in joining the organization a little bit ago. And I know Steve's going to walk you through some of our timeline here in just a bit, but maybe if you want to flip it. So where do we start? And I'll say this is a recipe. It is not the recipe. We have a long way to go as DexKo. One of the favorite parts of my job is we're never done. We're constantly evolving what we're doing. And from a talent perspective, we're actually going to start by grounding. I'm hoping that you'll get a nugget or three, new ideas, maybe, if not something tremendously profound in less than an hour now. And I should say on the front end of this too, it's a small community. You'll have my contact information. Please feel free to reach out anytime. I'd love to exchange ideas beyond just this call. Do it all the time, and I learn as much as I might give. So, just as a starting point, this is not to say the only things we do is as DexKo Global Talent or talent management, sometimes say, but these are the 4 things we come home to. And so we started to sort of define this with the organization when we first started, so that we can always come back to this. And we do. We do a lot of other things outside of these 4 tent poles, so to speak. But these are the 4. And I would really say the biggest thing here is trying to put it in the language of the business. So if somebody's in, just take performance management as a real quick example. If someone's in a current role, how are they contributing? If performance management didn't have such a trademarked, sort of, whatever you want to call it, if it wasn't so ingrained in the lexicon of what we do as HR, I'd call it contribution management. And t-shirts would be at the door. We would have a great time. The concert would be afterwards because we'd all be making bajillions of dollars calling it contribution management, I think. But it really is what it is. And so we talk a lot about that in the organization. These are words, but they matter. And so one of the things that we constantly try and do, if you want to flip Steve to the next one, is help the organization know where we're at and where we're going. And so whether it's contribution management or as we're talking about through the majority of today, growth and development of employees, starting with leadership development as our true north, we're charting a course. Here's where we're intending to go. We also say at DexKo that the microwave is slow. So we move fast. And so as a part of that, every organization tends to move fast and is rapidly changing. I think you'll see through some of our illustrative examples here, not kidding. We're in the part where we may be the club president as much as not just a member in that camp. So, charting a course doesn't mean that we're done. I said it earlier, I'll say it again with repetition and purpose, that this is where we're trying to go. We evolve. We put the plane together as we're flying it in a lot of cases. I'm sure all of you go through that on a daily basis. We make sure we have the landing gear. So what is our foundation is what we're about to speak to. And then we're constantly thinking about how can we help people adopt and evolve what we're doing as a business, not HR, as a business. And the last piece, if there was a fourth circle on this, our constant focus now, since we've built a fair amount of things, everything you build, you need to be able to maintain and sustain and evolve, is access and awareness for our employees. So how do we get them more access to the information, to the training, and how do we make sure that they're aware of when and where they can get that on demand? So that's a big focus for us now as we go into our fourth year.
And one of the things I wanted to point out here that I think Chuck and the organization here have done really well is to create a sticky program, if you will. And I know that as I work with clients, one of the things I hear from people in roles like Chuck as a global talent leader is they're having trouble garnering a budget, a commitment to talent programs that the C-suite saying, we have trouble filling roles and we don't have the right talent, but to try to, get the lion's share of the effort needed or the support from the organization to accomplish this is a challenge. And so this process that was institutionalized creates a way for the organization to always come back to as we develop programs and as you see these process. So I think there's something to be said for those of you that are thinking about how do I get kind of a sticky program in place and get a flywheel. So this is as important as, the way we do financial budgeting or safety, talent management is its ongoing process. Thinking about the way of creating a roadmap, I think is really helpful.
Thanks, Steve. And I should have mentioned too, as we even speak to this next piece, I've had the good fortune of working now for over 2 decades in the different things that we do as talent and as HR, operations, et cetera. And this stuff scales. So I've also had the good fortune of working in, $30+ billion organizations, couple $1 million organizations, privately held, publicly held, going through bankruptcy, coming out of bankruptcy, all the different flavors up to this point. And this stuff, I will say from my perspective, works. And not to say that I've somehow created something or the organization has. These are best practices or better practices in what we do. It's maybe how we put the pie together with these ingredients, so to speak, on an ongoing basis. But no matter what type of organization you're in, these pieces can work. That's another thing too, well beyond today, anytime you want to chat, you can do that for sure, because it can be sometimes tricky to see that at the full speed of work. But I'd love to break that down and maybe idea exchange. So this piece here, where Steve had said, the flywheel, what do you know? It's almost sort of looking like one. At DexKo, we call them success standards. These are really the competencies in the organization, and they didn't exist. The whole concept of talent management was brand new 4 years ago in the organization. And I started by, I always like to come into an organization and ask where the org charts are. You can tell a lot by how organizations are structured. And then start just asking questions and questions and questions as you navigate the organization. And a part of that is, what do we do? What makes us special? What makes us different? And these weren't defined. And so you see all employee on the left, you see leadership on the right. This was not a robust 16-page Excel document with 17 different models included. Those things can fall under their own weight, in my opinion. These are defined. And there are behavioral characteristics that are called out. That's it now. And I find a tremendous amount of value. There's good place in all of these things. For posters on a wall that talks about vision and mission and values and who we are and why we stand. We have some of that. But what I think is really important in what we do, and something to maybe keep coming back to beyond today, for myself, I always do, as anybody that's on the call as well, is everywhere an employee looks, these success standards show up in what we do. And these are the examples around the flywheel. One I will comment briefly here, just to give you a sense, is we call them success standards because that's, success really has no downside. It infers we're having it or we're going to. Whereas a competence is you have a competence, you do not. Oh, yeah. So it can be a little blading as an adult. And so, again, words matter. And to that, individual growth planning. So we actually integrate into performance and all the different touch points. They're all integrated at this point. They're at various stages of depth or maturity. And again, we're never done. But individual growth planning, that's IDPs. And as some of you probably have experienced, people all the time in our businesses confuse performance improvement plans, and IDPs. That's not a bad thing. The IDP is a good thing. And so growth, we've actually adopted in previous organizations, saw a 30 and 40% increase simply by starting to call it a growth plan and communication surrounding growth. The template was the same. The previous Stephen DexKo is something I've used. And for whatever it's worth, something to think about is just using growth instead of the word development. You don't use development in this PowerPoint and for very good reasons. But when it comes to a template or a tool, it can be very intimidating to us as adults. It's something that worked. And so growth has no downside. It rarely does, if ever. I've rarely heard somebody say, unless it was a growth as a human in some weird way that I can't identify, which I don't know what that would be. It just moves us forward. And so the main point here is, wow, where did you start? You started with competencies, really? Yeah, it's not very exotic, but it works. And everywhere an employee looks, these are integrated into how we measure people, how we move people, how they contribute in their roles, etc.
So to dig deeper then into, yeah. So the advanced leadership development programs were a large part of creating this talent success plan, as we were talking about. So if you think about the life cycle of this organization, it had, as Chuck mentioned, had started this acquisition kind of feeding frenzy, knew it was going to grow, knew that we needed more talent to grow in the organization. And so we decided intentionally, or the organization decided intentionally first to be grounded, as Chuck mentioned, into these success standards. And I have to say, as an outsider looking in for 4 years, what Chuck just said is real, that these success standards are simple enough and written in a way that speaks to the organization that they are used. Many organizations we work with who talk about competency, like, yeah, I think we have them, they're embedded in a performance review that I look at once a year. They're too big, they're too complicated. Here they actually speak the language of what's expected of you, and also is a litmus test for what you need to be promoted, and is also the guardrail for what is and is not in a leadership development program. So the first thing the organization did was to prioritize high potentials first before all leaders. So some organizations might say, I'm going to create a university curriculum and we're going to train everybody in this 1 or 2 or 3 classes. It was very intentional here because of the need to fill senior roles, is to pick those folks within the organization that they saw as talent, that they could see go to higher levels in the organization and cultivate them. And we'll show you exactly what that looked like. There was also an intentional focus in our conversations about creating a global program. The DexKo, the 2 organizations merging from 2 different geographies was something we talked about intentionally. Like, do you want to cross-pollinate the groups? Are there some differences in leadership expectations between US and Europe that we want to kind of be mindful of? And we decided to do pieces of the program separate and pieces of it together, and we'll share that with you. And then the other thing we really wanted to share and showcase today is, how do you make a program scaled up super quick? You'll see our timeline here was pretty fast and robust. And I know we feel grateful that up through the CEO, they said, let's use an external partner to do this work. Like, by the time, if Chuck were to hire and develop a training staff and a team to develop content and do this, we'd probably still be talking about it, and we wouldn't have trained as many leaders as we have. So there's an intentional strategy within the organization to retain little delivery staff, create strategic relationships to design the content, and then bring in a single source vendor in our work to scale this up. And we'll kind of walk you through what that looks like. Any other comments on that, Chuck, before we go into the timeline?
Yeah, you reminded me, Steve, too. I should have said on the outset that I have the gift of having a rock star CEO. He's not on the call, so I'm not saying that just because he's on a call or anything like that. We have a CEO that reads about what we do as HR professionals faster than I do, and I'm constantly reading. He loves what we do. That is a huge benefit to this, but it is not to say that because of that, it's been easy, or that we suddenly got, a vault opened up for us. That would never be the case in any for-profit or nonprofit, for that matter, but especially in a for-profit organization that is growing fast. That would never be the case. And then we also have an amazing group of HR operations staff that are the arms and legs of what we do. And they're really, really good at coaching our business partners, in addition to anything we might see from a talent perspective, and helping people connect to why we're doing what we're doing. So that's been a huge modifier. Best I've seen so far in my career to date, from a leadership perspective. But again, it's not to say that, well, this was an easy PowerPoint to put together and we all have a good day, tip or dump in and have a good day. There's still a lot of effort that goes into it. Boy, is that a gift.
You also want to share, as I think it would be helpful for this audience, kind of your ownership structure, because I know that some organizations say, well, yeah, if you had a CEO that came out of HR, this stuff's easy. But, we are run by a company that, thinks about numbers first.
Yeah, so we're owned by an equity firm, and it was actually purchased, and it was sold and purchased from an equity firm about a year ago. So it changed hands. And when it was formed in 2016, that's been the case. So it's technically privately held, and there are a lot of meetings on an ongoing basis. I've had experience in the past where I've had somebody from an equity firm sitting in my team. Not the case here. They're fairly hands-off in what we do, but they are not hands-off when it comes to the investment and how we measure some of that investment. So we're going to tease a little bit of the measurement that happens on an ongoing basis here at DexKo as it relates to this stuff today. But it's just the tip of the iceberg. I tend to enjoy it, so it's kind of fun that way. But they ask a lot of questions. What we're doing from a talent perspective is in every single board meeting. There's a brief meeting on a monthly basis, then a deeper meeting on a quarterly basis with them, and our stuff is directly in the mix on an ongoing basis. They ask, not because we've put it in there because it's something we think is important.
So we're going to show that there's a clear ROI on this work. So for those of you that say, I know I can't get a 6-figure budget, a 7-figure budget, whatever I need to develop talent, so you end up spending your money on recruiting and having jobs open and all this other infrastructure, I think we're here to say that this organization has had, after the investment, it said, what's the return on it to be able to do it again and again. So let's walk through what that looks like. So this is the timeline of this advanced leadership development program component of this. So we started in January of 19, because that's when Chuck was hired. So all good things happened after Chuck was hired. And then he immediately, I think so.
But yeah.
Yeah. So the first thing, as Chuck mentioned, he did was spent time to create leadership success standards. And that was an internally developed effort. We weren't involved with that at that time, but I know Chuck said, I need to know this organization, so let me go out and interview people, speak the language of DexKo, and create those standards. Luckily, we were a pretty quick call right after that.
So just real quick to that, the sequence of this, which we mentioned earlier, not a huge deck of Excel docs that could go on forever. In some organizations that would work really well. In most, I don't think it does. The creation of those success standards took a month and a half. So came in and said, can I clear the decks enough that when I'm getting to know the organization, this is something that we're building as I'm doing that. So it happened in real time, but a month to, I'd say 6 weeks, they were finalized with our leadership team.
That's a really good point, because it could be a year-long, cross-functional 10-person project at some organization. So it doesn't need to be.
Yes, and started January 4th, 2019, contacted Steve on the 6th.
Yeah, Chuck was like, get ready, we're going to need your support, and get your team of people ready to go. And, because we have a team of 60, I think we could garner a set of resources and be ready, and we'll show you how this unfolded in a pretty, mass way pretty quickly. So this call, like I said, this was, 1st of January in 19. And the goal was, we need to launch a first cohort of what's called the Next program. And we'll explain that in a little bit, with a set of current leaders, what the organization calls, and emerging leaders in both the US and Europe. And we launched that in February-ish of 2019. after the success standards were created. So that's 4 cohorts, 2 in the US at each level and 2 in Europe at each level. And we went from, 0 to 100 pretty quick. After
And the
that,
first time we real quick too, Steve, too, as a connection to that for the group that's on the call, the first time we road tested those, got them sort of right, and there's always going to be little tweaks here and there, but felt they were pretty good with their leadership team. And they were used to evaluate people that were part of the program. Because talent reviews hadn't started yet. That happened actually in March into April for the first time. Talent reviews being succession planning. So it's another example where you might go in a very specific order if you were to open a book, and that would be a second chapter, a third chapter, a fourth chapter. We put the fourth chapter first, and for many good reasons. But just so you know that we were trying and testing these things immediately.
the next kind of rub point in the organization, our need really was supervisor training. So we went from this more senior level hypo group to say, let's develop a curriculum and some content to retain and develop supervisors. So we launched a supervisor program. And my point about kind of showing how this unfolded too is to say there doesn't have to be this, pristine roadmap that everything's cascaded from top down necessarily. It's like, let's figure out what the organization needs in its talent pipeline. Where are our issues of concern for being able to, do what we do as a business and fill those. So we pretty quickly, later in 2019, launched a supervisor program. Then we were already ready. There was enough talent and need to promote people that we had a second cohort of this next program that we launched a year later in January of 20. So you can see in bold where we launched a program, and then after that, it was like, now it's a second cohort. It gets a little bit easier. That said, we learned from the first one, we tweaked it a little bit, and we were able to, get a second cohort going in pretty short order. That's when COVID hit, right? So we had an intentional, it could be a whole nother webinar, I think, on what do you do with programs like this. Hopefully we don't have to go through that again, but we made an intentional choice to pause the program for 11 months rather than try to do virtual programs for this audience. We did that for some other groups, but it just didn't make sense for this particular group of people. We did some things to make sure they were staying engaged, but then we kind of relaunched that a little bit after. Chuck then hired a leadership development specialist on his team. So now we, have a team of 2 still running this for a multi-billion-dollar organization. And we put that in there just to show, how you can really do this with not a lot of staff internally if you have the right setup here. We then launched Supervisor Cohort 2. So a year later, there was enough value in this. And the supervisor program is 6 full days of content at the shop floor supervisor level. So the organization saw enough reduction in turnover and promotions and value to fund the program at the operational level budget. From there,
Steve, just a couple of quick pivot points there. Sorry to interrupt. But just, the sort of behind the curtain of the slide, if this is on stage being the slide. So pause the program because of COVID. There's some heartburn, obviously, with that. This is about the time when we thought, we'll be at our houses for 2-3 weeks and we'll be good. And well, no, of course, we all experienced that. So one of the things, though, that worked out well in pausing it is we knew going into cohort 2, succession planning, the whole concept of development in any sort of formal or in many ways informal way, globally across every continent in the world where we have locations, was new. And what ended up happening is with that pause, people keep going. Everyone grows in their job every day. And so it kind of helped to really sort of falsely refill a pipeline. Not completely, but when you think about that ready now, ready in 1 to 2 years, ready in 3 to 5, we knew we saw again. We knew we were going to start to fall off and who we could select for this program, the next program. But it kind of helped with that. And then the cohort 2 supervisor training program that Steve was just speaking to, keep in mind This was at the point where we had done a cycle of talent reviews, of succession or replacement planning for roles across the organization, salaried and above, or salaried, some hourly, supervisor skill or supervisor roles as well, just from a scope perspective. But this is also where it started to be a part of people's action plans, specifically through the business. It wasn't HR putting an action plan forward. It was the business saying, this is something we need to add, make sure everyone goes through. And then it was in their goal plans, not the development plans or growth plans. It was in their actual business goal plans at this point. And that was voluntary by our operations leaders. So that's where you start to see if there was a shift from HR, and it's never complete, but if there's a shift from almost HR pushing to business owning and moving towards the suggestion towards us in HR, it was right in the middle here.
And that took less than 2 years to get that organization saying, I want more of this stuff, which is great. So from there, we launched what was called the core program. And this was a virtual set of training activities tied again to the success standards in 90-minute modules to develop professional salaried staff members to give them some development and engagement in the organization around those success standards. So while we had these other kind of plates spinning, we were able to meet the needs of yet a third really large and important audience, and we called this the core program. So this is beginning at 22 now. Now we have, as the organization buys another set of businesses, there's more people in the mix and the distribution side as well. We did a supervisor cohort, a third cohort of supervisor program. And then this was on the original vision plan. We launched what we called the Drive program, and it was similar in design as the HIPO program for the next program, but this was particularly for plant leadership professionals. So we looked at the success standards and the content, but put together cohorts of leaders that were all focused in plant environments. So beginning of this year, so we're talking 4 months ago, now we're on supervisor cohort 4 and the next program cohort 3. So now it's become business as usual. The organization has a clear pipeline. There are people asking to be in programs. The content is coordinated to be similar enough to fit the success standards, but different enough that if you do go from one to the other, you have a very different experience. And what that content looks like is here. So
go ahead, Steve. Oh, all I was going to say is one of the things too to keep in mind is we said in the front, I'll say sort of in the middle here, about the middle of the hour, is why did we select a hypo or a high performance blend of both, mostly high potentials, in the next program and in things like the next program? Part of it was the hyper growth in the organization and needing to have a pipeline that was built faster and deeper because of it. The other, though, is cultural. It is because we know if these are the influencers in the organization, as you all have experienced in your roles as HR professionals, those are the people that are going to take us forward, whether they're identified or not, whether they're on an org chart at the top or not. These are the people driving the organization, as we've all probably experienced. So it was twofold. It really was to also continue to create that stickiness. And then the output of that is we were able to gain leverage with the business. And as they were starting to step towards us, I said in the middle of that last slide where it continued to evolve in this way, is where they're asking us because it's a strong brand. So people see the logos, yes, they see the training, but when they see that it's something that's an extension of what we've started, they want it. Which was, I have to say, I've been pleasantly surprised. I did not expect that to the extent that it's been. But I think a lot of it is because there's good quality in what they're experiencing. Good word of mouth.
And the camaraderie built in the program because everybody in there are other leaders people can learn from, that they appreciate being able to meet people from Australia that they haven't met before, or, from plants might be, not that far away, but you wouldn't otherwise have had a reason to interact. And they get to talk technical business as well as leadership and culture and talent as well. So this content is the kind of core of the next part of the program, the HiPo program piece. So all participants share in some common items like a 360, they each receive external coaching, they each have a targeted development plan, there's in between workshops, and they close the program with each person doing a pretty formal leadership manifesto in front of the executive team. And we'll talk a little bit more later about kind of these things that make the program sticky. And then within the programs, there's specific content. So, we do a lot of self-assessments for self-awareness, you can see as well. So on the emerging leader side, they're using disc management. In this content, you probably look at that and go, yeah, that's, pretty standard stuff. And really the content itself isn't where the magic happens in this. It's important that it's good content. It's important that leaders are being communicated to what's expected of being a leader in terms of having difficult conversations and having courage and managing change, and they get skills. But the content itself isn't the magic piece. Anybody can kind of find and buy content. I mean, this is our Beyond Leadership proprietary classes, and then we can augment it with buying third-party assessments like DISC or an EQ assessment and things like that. But it's where the program comes together, and I'll show you that on the next slide, where I think it makes it sticky, because it goes from a series of classes to this ongoing year-long program that they are in, slowly peeling back your own mindset of what does it mean for me to be a leader, building some confidence, leaning into doing something different, coming back as a learning community, layering in some more classes and content. And by the end of the program, participants report that they feel like they are a much different, more competent and confident leader.
And one of the things I would say is there's a lot going on, as you can see. It can feel intense. But as people get going, they forget about that. Business forgets about that in a good way. And I've been pleasantly surprised by that one as well. In all the years of experience. The other thing is look at the amount of gray. I am more interested in what we do as HR professionals, as talent professionals, for whatever it's worth, in my experience. I am more interested in the gray than I am the color-coded pieces, those whether salmon or peach, whatever color you want to call it, where we're doing training. We know that Beyond Leadership is going to do a great job in partnership with us. It's going to have high quality. People are going to connect with it because of the facilitation of the content. I want to make sure, and Steve and team probably go, you're like, oh, here it comes again, is what are we going to do in between to make sure that on the job, current job, not just their future job in succession, that they are applying this, both in small groups and individually. Part of it is they actually have to, just to give you one example, and it's free from the standpoint everybody has a calculator when they're sitting in meetings, right? But nevertheless, the content in between isn't curated from a Beyond Leadership. It also is built internally because it's cultural. And so an example is they just have to come out of the first session after learning something new and sit down in their staff meetings with people that they manage and share it. That seems like, yeah, Captain Obvious, here you are, job, but nevertheless, it doesn't happen. So typically, so those are some of the things that you would see in the gray area, and some that I'm really passionate about and I've seen the most success with is training's got to be good, brand's got to get stronger. What we do to apply it in between, way as important, if not more important, on an ongoing basis. And the DN team's great at partnering with us on that as well, from an idea standpoint, what we're doing, how it connects to what they're training. So I belabored that a little bit, Steve. I know.
Yeah, no, that's great, Chuck. Yeah, so for this larger program that you can see is a year-long curriculum, we have put 131 people through the next program in these 3 separate cohorts. I just want to give you a sense of kind of people and how many people it takes in this, or how many people we were able to put through this. Outside of that, in the supervisor program, the 6-day program that doesn't have coaching or a 360, I mean, I don't have the numbers there, but it's multiple hundreds of people. And the Grow program, similarly, it's multiple hundreds of people. So out of the 7,000 employees now, many different leaders have or even professional staff have experienced some part of training from, again, Chuck started this department and function really in January of 19, and here we are not that far down the road, and this is deeply embedded and sticky throughout the organization. I just think it's a phenomenal story. Great, I see some questions are coming in as well. Feel free to start to use the chat, and we'll turn over to questions in a second, but wanted to share some of the metrics that we track in this program next. So from a results perspective, we looked at some training activity metrics and then some outcome metrics. And Chuck and his team through Matt really, and our team, Ann Wynn, who's our account executive, and Lauren Wilson, and we have a whole bunch of folks that are collecting data. And it does take a little bit of time and effort to collect information, but it is definitely worth being able to show the value of your program. So we looked at some activity pieces here, right? But we also looked at some outcome measures. So on the activity level, Chuck, you want to speak to these?
Yeah, so overall participation in the next program is 96%. Attendance, so butts in seats, we sometimes call it. I'm a hard grader. If you were to say that someone attended a partial session once, that's not included. If it was, it would be 98%. So again, business led, business encouraged. Pre-work completed, yes, 100%. So all pre-work has been completed, not somewhere there's wood somewhere where I'm sitting. Evaluations, what that's getting at is it's a good use of their time. The other extension of this is, if you're at all familiar with net promoter scores in marketing, just the extension of would I actually recommend this to others? Would I start to espouse this to others? And that's at just about the same percentage, which is a really high number for net promotion overall. And then performance management goal attainment. So we see 93% of those that are going through this program achieving what is described in their goals. Our average as an organization is 85%. So it's quite a pop. It's very similar to what we might look at the difference in engagement scores when you see improvement. When you see a delta of 5 to 7% in any sort of program or something like that, that's pretty good. It's strong. And then program completion, anyone who started, finished. We had no one bail, which I had never experienced in my career, for whatever it's worth. So overall.
Yeah, and I think these tell, I mean, even though they're activity measures, they tell an important story, because there are a lot of organizations, and we see it, where they ask us to come in and use the same kind of content, the same experience, and their culture is such that they can't get people there, or they're not engaged, or their leaders pulling them out of the program, and it's just not safe to be a learner. And so tracking these things to be able to see who actually accomplishes them is really an important element. And it goes from the C-suite here, who actually tracks and looks at who's in the program, and part of our job in this program is to go out and talk to people in between and see how it's going and connect the dots. All of those things matter to get these activity measures so high.
And then just from an overall, so going deeper than that, you have to start somewhere. So the previous page, and those are, like Steve was just saying, those are indicators, they're fuel for the fire that is engagement on an ongoing basis. Retention of participants. So very proud to say we've had 83% retention. You notice we didn't say the opposite of that. We've had how much turnover? We talk about how many we're retaining. And so then also from a promotion standpoint, hot off the presses, the last couple of weeks, we've had 6 more that were part of the next program that were promoted into new roles or replacing somebody that was in there before. That's what makes up that percentage. So we're now over 50%. And there's lots of different things that you could find, white paper or otherwise, but we built it looking for 30 to 35. So we've popped over 50% based on everything that our HR operations partners are doing, the participants are doing, and our business is doing to make that happen. Engagement scores of next participants. So we're above 70%, 11% higher engagement. So we've been very fortunate 3 years now doing engagement surveys. Just to give you a baseline, we've seen 5% increases year over year in our engagement level. these folks are showing their teams, people they lead and themselves are showing 11% higher than that overall. And then Ready Now, something we track, which is just somebody is identified, whether it's now 1 to 2 or 3 to 5. The Ready Now in particular went from 44% in our largely our EMEA, our European-based Elko business unit, is now sitting at 88%. We're about to go through talent reviews in the next coming months here, actually June. And then Dexter, largely our US-based business unit, went from 35 to 55. So a long way to go. We're not at 100%. We were at 99 instead of 1%. But pretty good jump in 3 years, I think.
So the ROI on that is huge. And not only are these filling, a lot of roles, but if you can imagine trying to fill a plant leader role in a very rural location with somebody experienced from within that now you feel like has the ability to lead, where before this program, we weren't sure that we would have put them in that role, that it's probably even worth more than whatever your benchmark number that you would give yourself as, 2 times the salary or something that it costs to recruit somebody in some of these challenging roles. So really great success story, which I think is where, the equity firm says, yeah, let's do more of this and let's keep developing people, because now the organization can grow and not worry about some of those challenges. Why don't we go into a couple of the questions first, Chuck, before we go into some of our recommendations in summary. So one of the questions was about utilizing self-assessments and another question was about using 360s. What 360 did we use and what self-assessments and how did they get embedded in the program?
I'll let you take the the Center for Creative Leadership from a 360 standpoint, but the tool itself, I'll let you explain, Steve. I'll take the other one.
Yeah, so we're actually using a tool called the Profiler now, and it is a 360 assessment that's been around for, 40 some years. It has a progress check feature after 6 months to check on progress on your development plan items. We as a company have used 4 or 5 different tools over the years, and we felt that this model just made most sense. It's very practical, multiple languages, easy to use. And we used to use Center for Creative Leadership's Benchmark 360 when we started this, and it just had a little bit of funky features to it, honestly, and we felt like the Profiler was better suited. There's also 9 different competency models. So if somebody is in the program and they're an individual contributor, senior level person, not a manager, then we could use a set of competencies so the feedback they're getting is more aligned with their role. On the self-assessment side, we embed work of leaders in this program. For the current leader program, we embed DISC management for the emerging leaders, and then we use MHS's EQI for an EQ assessment. I think those are the 3 main self-assessments we use, and most of those are tied into the course content. The 360 is connected with their individual coaching. So when they do their 360, their individual coach is debriefing their 360, and they're using their coaching sessions to unpack the 360 results and apply the content in the context of their job. The self-assessments are really unpacked in group workshops.
And just as an extension of those 2, and I can wrap in the 3rd question that came in, I think at least the 3rd that came in, was as far as who are the coaches, they are, it's a whole group of people worldwide that DN Leadership has in their network that are certified leadership or executive coaching professionals. And very intentional, we wanted that outside voice for these people to have to utilize. That said, we also have a calendar, a shared calendar, that all members of our executive leadership team spend at least an hour with every member of the program, or at least 2 members of the program, depending on the size of the group each time. So that touch point with our leadership and that visibility doesn't go away because we're using executive or leadership coaching outside. So that was one of the questions. And then utilizing Ron, just to make sure, the self-assessments that Steve identified, the utilization of those is happening in between with coaches, with their own teams, with small group exercises that are being done in between the training. And then also, when they go through, everyone has an active individual growth or development plan. And so it's plugged into that as well. Signals that are, sort of sometimes called the kaleidoscope. Those things when you're much younger and turn it and you suddenly see it clarify, or it's very pretty, one of the two. But in any case, the utilization is happening throughout in those various ways.
So each cohort is facilitated by one main facilitator throughout that year, so they get that consistency. And we have a cohort leader for the emerging leader program in the US, one for the current leader program, and then somebody different in Europe. And when we do get together one time, they get to see a little bit of each other facilitation as well. But then out of the coaching slate, we give the participants a group of, up to like 10 or 12 coaches to pick from on our team. So the fact that they get to pick a coach that comes from a particular demographic or that they want to receive coaching from, they're not just assigned a coach, they get the opportunity to select from coaches. And some of them want a coach that speaks their language, their country language. Because if you can imagine, if you're coming to a workshop, and it's in English and your native language is Italian or German or Spanish, it's a lot harder to sort of be present, but having a coach that maybe speaks your language adds a lot to that. So, within these programs, there's probably, 20 different Dion people involved in one cohort. I mean, it's a lot going on. The other question is also this is a question really for you, Chuck, then about,
promotion of the program. So promotion of the program overall happens more organically. We don't have a lot of posters that say the next program, because it's a really select group. Initially it represented a little under 5% of our population, and it's right around that now. But in any case, one of the ways that we talk about it is they have to talk about it. So if we have quarterly calls as a business, if we have, which we do, if we have monthly calls or voicemails that are left by our CEO that anybody can listen into, or he gives weekly updates in that way, he talks about it. But we also put them in front of people to talk about their experience on an ongoing basis. And then when we go through the first cohort into the second cohort, they come back. And now we're extending that into, they're the facilitators of our training. So the promotion comes through people seeing them and seeing their success. And then we have things like, we call DexKo TV, it's the thing that runs on an ongoing basis with PowerPoint, those sorts of things, Sway, whatever you want to call it. It's all kinds of technology behind this point. The quick of it though is we also have stories in there. So we're telling the story more organically, and I would say upfront promotion that you might think of, and very intentional. And so you kind of sometimes say and change light a candle, it's a single flame of power. And those are what we're lighting quite a bit throughout the organization to create the movement and people's interest on an ongoing basis. And there is interest. We get a lot of questions about how can I get involved in that. As far as predefined criteria, there's performance metrics. They have to be a certain threshold. It comes through the talent review process now, though. So as we go through, once we went through our first cycle, it was out ahead of the talent review or succession that I mentioned. Now, though, it comes in follow-up to our third quarter as we're planning our budgets. We do a third quarter lighter version of our talent reviews or succession check-in. You plan and forecast the business, you plan and forecast the people. And so when we go back in and reforecast in our third quarter, our succession plans, we also are going through nominations for the next program. Who selects them and who actually is that's our executive team. They know them. So that's been a huge part of it too, is they actually get to know the people that are nominated. And if they don't, they have a coffee together. So it comes through our executive team. It's nominated or sponsored by their senior leader and whomever they report to.
And when we kick off the cohort, we spend a fair amount of time in a formal kickoff with the participants and their leader and the CEO. And, Fred, as the CEO, comes in and he'll talk about, I remember when I had my Myers-Briggs and here's my score and this is what it meant for me. And this is the time in my life when I got development and here's where it worked. And, it's very much sponsored by the C-suite. And I think that really has made a really big impact in this program.
And Anita, I see that was you that was asking that. Feel free to shoot me a note after this or just use my email address. that we all have at the end of this as well. And I'd be glad to go a little deeper. We're up against time. So.
And then to get it launched the first time, I think you need that. After that, when people go, oh, this person was in this program and they're promoted and another one's promoted, somebody else then becomes, how do I get in that program? Like if I want to do something more in with the organization, or they come back and tell these stories about how great it was and who they got to meet, what they got to do and who they got to interact with. It's pulling after that. It's not seen as drudgery, which is really nice. So with our last 5 minutes, we wanted to share just a few kind of our top 10 recommendations or sort of the differentiators of this program. Some of these we may have covered through our conversation already, but let's kind of go through them real quick. So the first one is to put leadership development language and metrics in the language and metrics of the business. So don't talk about this program in terms of an employee is going to like it, or it's to get to certain, I don't know, maybe the word psychological safety doesn't resonate to your, senior leaders. It's like use business language. So what was your business language, Chuck?
In a lot of cases, we talk about almost every organization has a supply chain. And so one example of that is when you think about succession, and you think about supply chain is supply and demand. Succession is demand and supply. Where do we have the demand for different people in different roles strategically working on the right stuff? And how are we going to fill that from a demand standpoint? And how are we going to flow them into the organization? Another one would be, I mentioned it very quickly earlier, but I'll bring it back, is every business forecasts or plans and forecasts for business. What do we plan to do from a growth perspective? And are we meeting that forecast? Talent reviews and the whole concept around development is the same. Why wouldn't we do that with our people? Seems obvious. I know there's lots of reasons beyond this call that we could go into, but why don't we plan and forecast our talent and intentionally focus on strategies to help them grow? Same thing for the business.
Yeah. Thanks. Second one is to garner a budget, and starting with the Cadillac budget. Like for organizations that CEOs say, I want miracles with our talent pipeline, and you got, $8 in an hour. You got to have the right conversations. And Chuck's done a phenomenal job of that in terms of getting a good understanding of what it is in the marketplace to do this, to think about each person. Any other secrets on what you would do with this real quick?
I spent a lot of time in my career, just with full transparency, breaking down a budget before I even walked in the room. So we knew we needed $10, so to speak, and we'd go in with $1 because we thought they'd say no, yes, maybe, kind of, sort of, left, right. And I walked in and had these conversations with proven metrics and proven concepts, and they're like, yeah, go. Now, that doesn't happen all the time in every different organization. The point being is I myself, just as many HR professionals, I'm pretty sure, from what I see in my network, we'll shoot ourselves in the foot before we walk in the ring. Don't do it.
Yeah. We really talked a lot about senior leadership involvement already. We've talked about the partnership with the resources. I mean, if you're really trying to launch something quick, like utilizing an external partner, not that you have to use us, but it's a good lesson learning, like know when and how to use a partner and not just give them pieces of information, but, really involve them in the process. Show the business outcome. I think we've talked a little bit about that already, and we gave you some metrics there. Brand the program. That was the other question here about kind of how do you make it sticky. You saw that it has NEPS program. It has a logo. Grow has a, brand. Make it sticky is another important part through calling it something intentional within the organization. The success standards is a catchier term than competencies, frankly, because people have heard that generically. Remember that people want development opportunities, and people, especially now in the great resignation years, will go away. This GROW program that we're doing for the supervisor or for the professional level staff, every one of those courses get filled up. We have a certain budget. We are doing so many every single time. There's more people that want those, and we have to say we'll put you on the wait list for the next one. But people are hungry for development. Share that. There's a lot of good data out there in the world to share with your executives to be able to help garner a budget for that. And make sure the program's so elite that it does raise your brand. Like, make sure it's not bad training and it's not an awful experience and sort of death by PowerPoint and the wrong people in the room. I mean, it has to have value for people to come back and say, this was worth my time. We survey that, and it's one of our questions. This was worth my time, you know, compared to what else I could be doing in my day to accomplish my business objectives. It has to have, you know, an elite status. And don't forget the network, how powerful the network is that people are building in the program. Like, be intentional to put people in that get to know each other throughout this experience, because there's a return just on that. In sitting in some of these social events, talking to some of the participants, I can spot out a few of them where they're like, I found out that this person uses this technical vendor for this, and we built relationships. And I mean, lots of business value happens that way. And then last is the experiences between the program are really important. And I think Chuck spoke a little bit to that, but you know, that's really where it's sticky.
That's my number one.
Yeah, begin with the end in mind. Number 10. So we're at the top of the hour. So I think we should close up at this venture. Thanks, Chuck, for agreeing to tell your story and putting it together in paper. It's just a testament to the relationship we have. And if you want to talk to Chuck about it, like you said, he mentioned he would be happy to. When we send out the replay of this, we'll put Chuck's email in there, so you don't have to jot it down right now as well. And then just some housekeeping things. We do have our next webinar. We do one of these every other month, and it's going to be July 18th on a Tuesday, and it's going to be a coaches panel. We do this once a year where we bring 3 of our leadership coaches together and have a conversation like this about what are you seeing in coaching? What is it looking like, you know, in terms of today's world of coaching? So whether you're internally a coach or you want to think about how would you bring coaching into your organization, it'll be another kind of panel discussion like this. And you can look for that in our email communications as well and in the note. Well, we're out of time. Thanks. If there's any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we can respond to you as well then, but want to be respectful of your time. I appreciate you being here. And again, thanks, Chuck, for sharing your wisdom today.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the opportunity.